2 new members are joining the Big Ten Conference, bringing with them a lot of money and a lot of extra airplane miles that athletic departments are going to have to fly in the coming years. Nathan Baird from cleveland.com, along with Stephen Means and Doug Lesmerises. We just talked to Ohio State Athletic Director Gene Smith, Ohio State President Christina M. Johnson, and they kind of broke down all of the reasons why this is a positive thing for Ohio State. What are the biggest drawbacks? So what are the biggest challenges that this creates for Ohio State, but really the Big Ten at large, as you try to push these 2, geographically outlier programs into what has traditionally been a Midwestern conference?
Because this is about football, I'm going to use a football thing because nobody cares about the other sports. UCLA and USC are going to spend the entire week practicing in nice, beautiful weather like we have today, and then they're going to show up in a Big Ten program in November where it might be snowing, it might be cold on a Saturday morning where it's 9 a.m. their time, but it's noon here and they have to play a noon game. This all sounds good until USC loses to Purdue in a noon game because their players are not used to being at that time.
Well, that's USC's problem. Why does the rest of the Big Ten care about that?
It kind of works the same way because if Ohio State's got to go play USC and then now they've got to get back, the travel does not make sense here, and there's no way it's going to make sense. No matter how you want to put this, it takes 3 hours to fly from Columbus to Los Angeles, regardless of how you want to slice this bread. And so whether you're talking about a football game, whether you're talking about a basketball game that happens on Tuesday night, it takes 3 hours to get from Columbus to Los Angeles. Until somebody can think of a faster way to do that, that's going to have an impact on these students.
Doug, what do you see right now as the biggest stumbling block or the thing that still has to be ironed out to make this work?
Yeah, the logistics, I think, of all the other sports. Ohio State has 1,000 athletes. 85 are on scholarship for football. It's about 100 on the football team altogether. So those other 900 athletes now have conference teams in California. And I asked about that. That was my question. We only got one question for Gene Smith and Christina Johnson. And they said, well, most of those teams don't play midweek games. Most of them will be on the weekend. Gene Smith said basketball will be the real issue. And they sort of said you can study on a plane, which, I mean, I guess it's like you can study on a plane. I guess that applies. They're already doing that. There is stuff, though, Gene Smith said we're worried about when you get back after a game and then you have practice the next day. I mean, you can't talk about health and welfare and mental health and nutrition and all these things and then be like, oh, yeah, our 6'2" volleyball players had to sleep on a plane and then be at practice at 1 o'clock the next day. So it's one of those things. They said, yes, there are logistics to work out. And then that's the end of that answer. It's like, and there's a whole lot of working out to do. We also, I think we all understand this is an in-between step. There's probably going to wind up being like a Big Ten East and a Big Ten West. There's going to be things where you're not doing it constantly, but let's not pretend that's not some issue. I do think it's more for the other 900 athletes and all those other Olympic sports. They said it's not going to be as bad as you think, and our kids are smart, and they'll study on a plane.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that answer. I mean, from when I covered basketball exclusively in the Big Ten, and you would see teams having to, play 9 o'clock tip-off games on the road on Wednesday nights, and those teams get, charter flights back to help with that at least a little bit. There are a lot of other, as you're saying, the Olympic sports where you're getting on a commercial flight to go from here to there. And I think Gene is right that a lot of those things tend to be on the weekends, but I think it is still going to cause some issues. I think there's also, you're right, that they're going to have to, I don't know that this works long-term if it is just UCLA and USC on an island. And I think they're going to have to figure out, so what is the next move, and is it going to be strategic from a geography standpoint more so than a Association of American Athletic University standpoint or the other things that have maybe been a bigger factor? Do you have to make geography a bigger factor this time to make this all work now that you have put these two teams way out there on their own? Now could you put Colorado in the middle, put another West Coast team out there, and some intermediate step? I don't know. There aren't a lot of necessarily like gleaming candidates, I guess. These two seem really good. So you've got to really kind of thread the needle on how you now make this next step. But I agree with both of you that there is going to be a next step. Much more about this on Buckeye Talk, and get the text 614-350-3315, Ohio State news and analysis all year round.